Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunctions. Without further ado, we're going to let Mr. J.R. Wise introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hey, I'm the lesser JR. I'm a former Marine and soldier. Grass wasn't greener on the other side, spoiler alert. I started writing back in 2019 at the suggestion of my counselor. She thought I should stop eating the crayons and start writing with them, and it's been very therapeutic. Published my first book this year, and I've got a couple more in the works.
Yeah, freaking standard. That's how I started writing too. There is something therapeutic. I wouldn't say it's a substitute for therapy, but there's definitely something cathartic about sort of letting that all out. So, obviously, dear listener, we tell you how we first found them. So we actually found JR, the other JR, although we all pale in comparison to Tolkien. Like he's the OG JR.
Yes.
But we found him lurking in the abandoned Twitter warehouses. So we kidnapped him right before they transformed it to X. And we've been keeping him in the basement writing. It's kind of worked out for us. He's got a book out. So we figured we'd talk to him about it so he could see the sun again.
It's been so nice. I forgot what it was like.
All right. So obviously you're listening to this. It's January and we're in the future because we're recording this before Turkey Day after his first interview with us. But we're going to pretend this is the first, dear listener. So that way we get this, we can capture the moment. So we do have to ask you the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right. Stargate, Battlestar Galactica, or Babylon 5?
Stargate.
Excellent answer. Do you have a favorite?
I mean, Jack Carter, my, Richard Dean Anderson. I mean, I love him.
MacGyver. You can't go wrong.
No.
He's the reason I had a mullet in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we burned all the pictures. There is no proof. So did you see the original movie that started it all? That I think Kurt Russell, might have been in it.
Yeah, I think it was Kurt Russell. He played Colonel Carter. Yeah, it was. I remember seeing it. I watched it with my dad when I was a kid, and I really liked it. And then I'd kind of forgotten about it until SG-1 came around. And then I watched that, and I actually went back and watched the movie. And I was like, the movie's kind of trash.
I like both differently, but I remember I've seen very few movies in the theater, and up until recently, so I watched a movie post-COVID. I've seen 2 movies in the theater, but before that, the last movie I'd seen in the theater was Last of the Mohicans in the 90s and Stargate. And both times when they came out, I went with my dad. So it was kind of cool because it was between his med cruises. So we would go to the cinema cafe and get horrible nachos. And when mom asked, we always told her we had a salad. It's kind of the rules. And then we'd have the nachos and watch the movie. It was great. I wonder if those are still open. Do you have anything like that where you're at, like the movie theaters that play, not when they're brand new, but later, slightly older movies, and they got the restaurant?
We have a cheaper theater like that here. It's only like $3 for the matinee. So yeah, that's the one me and my wife go to if we go at all.
Yeah, they make their money back in selling you the food.
Oh yeah.
But all right, and because we are polytheistic, we're going to rock out to some of the coolest 80s stuff out there. So, Dragon Slayer, Willow, or Conan the Barbarian?
Conan the Barbarian.
Excellent. Have you seen both of them, or just the original?
I've just seen the original. I haven't seen the new one. Is it worth seeing?
I've heard that it's good, but I mean, the ladies that tell me that, it's called Jason Momoa. So I don't know if the movie's good or he's good, and they're just happy to stare at him.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Momoa is a great actor, but I mean, I'm just skeptical of any remake of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah, I get that. We're actually going to do an episode later in the season where we compare both Conans, the remake and the Schwarzenegger and Momoa one, and just kind of see, because it's kind of fun sometimes to go compare like for like the reboot versus the original. Most of the time they do that, it's a season or it's a series. So who's got time to watch hundreds of hours of episodes? But for 2-hour movies, all right, we can make time for that.
That's pretty doable.
We'll have to bring you back for that one, so we can nerd out over the Conan.
All right, so my homework is to watch the new one. Got it.
Well, You'll have time because we'll give you warning before the episode. I try to watch them like right before so my memory doesn't get in my way. Who knew getting blown up was bad for your health? All right.
It is. That explains so much.
It does. I mean, but we did get to play bumper cars overseas, and nobody got mad at us when we wrecked our Humvees because we did it on purpose.
They got mad at us.
Well, so we were escorting like transportation convoys, so we were the security element.
Yeah.
And you clear the V beds off the road by sort of basically playing bumper cars for real. In fact, when we taught our replacements how to do the combat driving, we jokingly called it Road Rage 101. And it works. It's very therapeutic to crash your car and other people's on purpose.
Yeah, I bet.
I don't suggest doing it without a seatbelt though, because like I said, concussions are a thing.
Hey, yeah, safety first.
Well, third or fourth.
Yeah, if it makes it at all, to be honest.
All right, and because the episode that they will see after this one, but you've already told us your favorite dinosaur, we're going to ask you, what is your favorite zoo animal?
I get really excited about two zoo animals. One is giraffes because I'm still not totally convinced they're not robots, and then lemurs. I don't know why. I just think lemurs are really cute and funny.
I get it. I've always liked the polar bears and the wolves for some reason.
Solid choices.
But I was a voracious reader as a kid, so I was the guy that got in trouble in elementary school for reading Stephen King books. Admittedly, I was doing it for the attention. Like I knew I wasn't probably supposed to be reading that kind of book, so I did it to mess with the teacher because I had like in fourth grade, I had one of those teachers where like we were her first year out of school. So I was just messing with her because, what are little boys going to do, right? But mess with their teachers.
Right.
And so when that happened, my mom found out about it. And she started giving me David Eddings stuff instead. Have you read the Belgariad?
No.
So in that book, it's epic fantasy, highly recommended if you like fantasy. But in that book, his grandfather is like this super powerful wizard and can change his shape. So he's not a shifter in the form of like werewolves or just, shifters for animals. He could just sort of change into anything. It's not like tied to one thing. And in this case, because they were trying to move through the woods, he thought it made more sense to be a wolf than a bird because it's hard to learn to fly. And I was like, oh man, being a wolf, that sounds kind of cool. And so I've been like obsessed with wolves since then. Since that's been about fourth grade. So for me, like going to the zoo, like, oh, that's cool. I've got to go see the wolves. So I've been to a couple cool zoos though. Like I've been to the Indianapolis Zoo and then a few times, which was kind of awesome. I dug it.
Have you been down to the Charlotte Zoo? Because it's pretty close to you.
I haven't. I've been to the Norfolk Zoo, but it's not as cool as the Indianapolis one. It's smaller, less selections. But you know what? I'm gonna have to make the trip out to Charlotte.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good. My wife and I decided to do like a 12-year-old date weekend is what we called it. Like we just went out and did the most childish ass things all weekend, like going to the zoo and playing mini golf and laser tag, and it was great.
Yeah, I want to go out to the Natural Bridge and the Luray Caverns because those just are kind of cool. Mm-hmm. I've always wanted to go. I understand some people have problems with the caverns because the whole claustrophobia thing. Doesn't bother me. Yeah. So it's and then in the Luray area, there's the Black Snake Meadery. So I'm like, sampling the booze. That's cool. I could do that. So, all right. So if you're out up north though, then you get the snow this time of year. That should be interesting. Do you like it? I mean, if you're from farther south, this is probably a new experience for you since you got there.
We got snow a little bit when I was a kid. Arkansas was more prone to ice storms, so like the snow we get out here every once in a while is kind of crazy. I was stationed in DC in 2009 during the snowpocalypse. I remember digging a tunnel from the barracks to work. That was a lot of fun. I'd never seen that much snow before. Honestly, I don't much like snow, but my dog loves it, so I tolerate it.
Nice. So I did my pre-deployment desert warfare training for my second tour in Iraq. They sent us to Fort Dix, New Jersey in the snow. So I can appreciate on the one hand, like when you're in the barracks and you got that fire escape, if you stick all your booze on the fire escape and it's snowing, you've got a natural freezer and like out of sight, out of mind, it works. The flip side of that is you're right. Like PTing and that stuff is miserable. And all we had was our desert gear because we were going to a desert. So like we're supposed to do like stop, drop, and roll type maneuvers, movement to contact in snow drifts that like you can't see anything anymore because you're now on the ground with like 5 feet of snow above you. Only the Army is going to send you to a snowpocalypse and tell you it's desert training.
That tracks. Yeah.
So it was definitely an interesting experience. I saw some of the crazy stuff of my life, though. I had one of the guys. So I don't know where you did your pre-deployment stuff from, but we did. Fort Dix was one of them, and they have this fob where you're supposed to practice training for living on bases, like getting used to the guard rotations, watch security on base, because even though you're in the base, you still keep like your weapons. So like the standard rule was boots and utes, right? So you had to keep your helmet, your rifle, and your web gear on at all times because you always had to be ready to fight. And I remember I was pulling guard, and this dude is wearing nothing but pink boxers, his helmet, his webbing, and his rifle, as he's running barefoot through the snow because the MRE hit. And I just looked at that, and I'm like, if I wrote that in a book, I'm thinking about this now, nobody would ever believe that. Like, yeah, right. But it's the funniest thing. And we were laughing at him when he came out of the porta-john because it was just so hilarious. He was just, not my fault, it's cold. Right? Because he thought that's why we were laughing. And I'm like, we weren't looking there, I promise.
Yeah, I said that on a C-17 once when I passed out and fell through the bathroom and woke up with my wang hanging out. And the colonel and then like 3 females and some random airmen were standing over me. And I looked up, and all I could think to say was like, "What? It's cold." And and then when we landed in Alaska on the way back, like that was all anyone could talk about was me passing out and showing the colonel my dick.
I mean, you do what you got to do.
Yeah. Still didn't get promoted.
I met the colonel a few times, but for less than pleasant circumstances. When you're an E5, like, there's do you know who Taylor J. Satfield is? He's a former Marine. He wrote the EAS song, so he would have been sort of contemporary to your time in the Corps.
Yeah.
So one of the lines in that song was, "I'd rather ride over an IED than have the BC look at me," or "speak to me" is the line. Like, I understand that on a visceral level. So like when you're running convoys, like IEDs are a huge thing. So you don't leave trash because anything that's in there that's trash can become shrapnel that is into you. So we abandoned a lot of trash in the deserts of Iraq. And so that being the excuse, he had a glass water jug of no, it was a glass jug of something. I don't remember what it was, but it was a drink he bought at the PX. And we're driving down the highway on our way to Camp Navstar to catch our convoy where they were waiting across the berm. And that's the time we stopped in our Humvee at a Burger King, by the way, and we got Halil Whoppers. I can tell you that they are not good. But we did take our gun truck through the drive-through. So there's that. But so we're driving down, whatever that main highway is, and I can't remember anymore, but the main highway in Kuwait, and he's sitting under the turret, and he throws his glass jar up because physics say it looks like it just hangs there because you're going into the force and then it'll go shoot backwards. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the vehicle behind us was the vehicle that the commanding general of the Kuwaiti army was riding in. So the next thing I know, I get to Camp Navstar and there's a helicopter waiting, and I had to take this young PFC from Boston, excuse me. And the two of us got to ride a helicopter to meet the commanding general of the 3rd Army, my battalion commander, and the Kuwaiti army commander. And I'm like, can I just shrink into the grass now? Like, just shoot me now. Get this over with. It was an interesting experience. And nobody does wall-to-wall counseling like 101st Sergeant Major will do wall-to-wall counseling.
I'll take your word for it.
I don't suggest finding out. But yeah, it's not in my bucket list of things to repeat. So anyway, so you went both of your times to Afghanistan, though. So you got, as far as terrain goes, man, that's worse. Like,
when I was over in Afghanistan, I was with Light Armored Reconnaissance. So we were down in the Helmand Valley. So it was either like wide open desert or just like basically canals and swamps. And so about half our AO, we couldn't bring vehicles in because they'd get stuck. So we were like cutting our way through with machetes like it was fucking Vietnam or something. And then the other time we were just rolling around in the open desert playing high stakes Minesweeper.
That was my experience because it was mostly flatland. Although in northern Iraq and Mosul area where we did some runs, that was interesting. I actually was providing support to the Marines at Second Fallujah for my first month there. That was an interesting experience. The Marines did teach me a very important lesson. Gear adrift is a gift.
Yes.
And so when we got it back, I think we've talked about this on other episodes, but we liberated in return some of their guidons because their guard corporal was like asleep. Apparently that's a big no-no because he had some explaining to do later.
Oh yeah.
And so we would keep our tow bars combat ready. So they were like rigged up, ready to go, just ratchet strapped in place. Because in an emergency, you just cut the ratchet strap with your knife and you're good to go. They thought that was free for the taking. So we had to get even. It was an interesting experience, you Marines.
Oh yeah, like, and you mess with the Marines colors, like that's bad. Like I think it's 4th Marine Regiment, I'm pretty sure, is the only regiment to ever lose its colors in combat, and that was in World War II. And their regimental headquarters is never allowed back on U.S. soil because of that. So they're like based out in Oki, and then the battalions got spread across the rest of the Marine Corps.
Yikes. So this was Air Wing Marines that liberated our stuff, and so we returned the pleasure of liberating their guidons. It was an interesting experience. So I was a team leader, although I led enough people. It was a rifle squad. I had 12 people that worked for me because it was about vehicles per fire team as opposed to personnel. And every gun truck's a 3-man team. But my senior fire team on my squad was a former Marine, and he got off embassy duty, and he was like, well, I don't really want to deploy again, and the Marines are going to send me right back out. I'll go in the National Guard. They never go anywhere. And literally less than 2 weeks after joining the Guard, he got mobilized. He's like, well, crap, if I was known I'm going back anyway, I'd just gone with the Marines. There's a lot of good training, though, because you the 0300s, or was 0331, I think, is infantry.
03. So anything with a 03 in front is infantry. 11's a rifleman, 21's a recon, 41's a mortarman, 31's a machine gunner, 51's an assaultman. So there's different specialties within the infantry field.
Okay, that's the same R11 series, and then Bravo's infantry, Charlie's mortars. Mike used to be mounted, but I don't know that they use those anymore. They kind of streamlined all that. But yeah, we had some interesting experience with them. But one of the times we had one of our vehicles or civilians stole his truck, and he's trying to run into Fallujah to bring this Connex box full of RPGs and stuff that was supposed to be going to our coalition allies that were still using some of the non-EU standard stuff. And he was trying to liberate it. And so we caught up with him right as we got to the end of the Marine lines at Fallujah. And I'm looking at this Marine PFC, and I'm like, hey, can I borrow that AC4 real quick? Because I want to take this vehicle out. It's my responsibility. And that's when I learned that I humped it. It's mine, mother effer. And then he got to shoot my vehicle instead of me, which was totally if you ask me. But what are you going to do? As a gunner myself at one point in time, I can't appreciate that when you carry it, it's yours when the party comes to town.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't really blame him, but I was kind of hoping like he'd see the stripes and just go for it. Because, Marines get a little bit more finicky about like the parade rest and jump into like protocol for NCOs. Whereas like my guys were kind of not lax because, they were good at the important stuff, right? They could shoot like the best of them, but it didn't matter in Fallujah. He's like, I don't give a crap who you are. Your dad could be the president and I'm going to shoot this thing and you're screwed.
Hey, priorities. If it was something in garrison, I'm pretty sure he probably would have just snapped parade rest and said, "I sergeant." But you're not going to stop a Marine from killing something.
Yeah, I didn't really expect yes to be the answer, but you can't get told no if you don't ask, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you for trying.
I actually saw a T-shirt somebody had once. Is the difference between the Marine infantry and the Army infantry is the Army will go over there and kill it. Even stab it with the bayonet if they have to, and the Marines will try to stab it twice just to see if they can poke the same hole. So it tracks. All right, so since we're talking about the military stuff, we'll come back to the coffee question. But since we're already here, obviously you mentioned when you introduced yourself that you served in both the Marine Corps and the Army. So we kind of ask all of our authors who are also military veterans this question. But how do you feel like your time in the service, both Army and Marine Corps, affects the way you tell stories?
At first, it was really detrimental to the way I tell stories because I spent a lot of time as a reconnaissance scout in both the Marine Corps and the Army. So At first, my writing sounded like a mission debriefing or a scouting report, which is not entertaining at all. And tends to be kind of like very blandly worded. But I think kind of once I started thinking about how I would actually tell stories, like while I was just joking with the guys, that's when things started to get better. It's like, okay, I don't really need necessarily everything to be pretty and proper and grammatically correct all the time, especially with like dialogue. Like just write it how Marines would say it. And then maybe go back and dial back some of the F-bombs just for readability. But I think it gave me something to write too. I mean, like, honestly, I'm not the most creative human being in the world. Almost every one of my characters is based on a real person or some conglomeration of real people.
Yeah. So that asks the question: is you do actually draw on people you knew?
Yeah. Yeah, like the series I'm writing for Canon Publishing right now is literally just about me and my old platoon sergeant, and basically how I was the most troublesome, but at the same time most reliable squad leader he ever had.
That's always nice. I got to my platoon sergeant always told me that he, never planned to be the commanding general of the Third Army. So he was less than pleased with me for that. So I imagine we can go head for head on the gray hairs we gave our senior NCOs. But on the flip side, he did get a coin out of it. I didn't get the coin because, but he got a coin.
There you go.
Got for putting up with me. That was what the Third Army commanding general told him. It's like, man, you put up with this? I mean, he said it more general-like, but
yeah.
I was light infantry for most of my time as an infantry. I definitely couldn't do the recon stuff. As my instructor once told me, I moved like a pregnant dinosaur with trick knees. So like I wasn't the most silent person when it came to moving through the terrain.
And that was so like my whole time in the Marine Corps, like I did all that stuff in the desert which is actually pretty easy to sneak through, at least at night, and during the day it's almost impossible. But when I went over to the Army, and when I say Army, I mean like Army Light, it was the National Guard. But
he's a nasty girl.
Yeah. But and I was with 1st Battalion, 116th Infantry, so like the Bedford boys, like the guys who hit D-Day, like a really storied unit, which is really cool. But then we're trying to do all this sneaky secret squirrel stuff out in the woods in Virginia, and I was like, man, twigs make a lot of noise at night. This is a lot harder. So it was kind of cool. I went into it a little cocky, if you can believe that about a Marine working with the Army.
Shocked, I say.
Yeah, I know, right? But there was a lot of good guys in my unit, a lot of people with a lot of combat experience, a lot of like former Ranger Bat dudes, and they taught me a lot.
Yeah. I got a benefit of a lot of really good high-speed training too, so I'm not complaining. It's time and place, just because when I was there for the war, when I was in active duty, made it a little bit different. Because I mean, like my platoon sergeant served in Nam.
Oh wow!
He caught the tail end of it, so he was one of those guys. He did 3 tours in Nam. His last one was like 70, I think, and then he got out. And he has that realization most people hit when they hit about 38, because if you figure you enlisted 18, at 38 you realize, shit, if I'd stayed in, I'd be retired right now. And when that epiphany hit him, he went and enlisted in the National Guard, and then he put in his 30-year retirement letter at 31 years, and that's when we got orders for this deployment. And they're like, "Yeah, Sarge, you're not quite done. You got one more rotation." I mean, like when we were in Iraq together, he legitimately qualified for Medicaid and Medicare and all that old people government security money. Like he was old enough. He could have been, collecting his pension, and instead he was out there with us. So, but hey, he was a sci-fi nerd too. When he promoted me to sergeant, he quoted the Starship Troopers movie. "It's your job until you die, or I find someone better."
That's great.
So, I mean, that's kind of intimidating though, because like I'm 5'9", he was like 6'3", and big dude. He was a lineman in football. He got hurt, and that's how he got drafted, because he lost his waiver once he got kicked out of college because he got hurt. So he's not exactly a tiny man. And when I saw him in his dress uniform before we deployed, like he had combat hashtags up to his first sergeant rocker.
Jeez.
I don't know where all they sent him, but a lot of places. So we just smiled and nodded. And if he said to do it, we're like, okay, if you say so, we'll do it that way. All right. So we asked you before. We're going to ask you again because they'll listen to this episode first. But because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
All right. Since we're actually in the middle of winter, I'm going to say spiked hot chocolate.
Okay. What do you prefer to spike it with?
Preferably peppermint schnapps because it's delicious that way.
I mean, since sometimes my counselor does listen to this, I will say that I don't do that. Wink, wink. But I also will agree with you that it is delicious, theoretically.
Yeah. If you were to try it, right.
That is a weird thing since you mentioned you started writing as therapy. When you show up at your shrink's office for the PTSD therapy and your books are just sort of stacked on the desk and he's like, so JR, let's talk. I'm like, oh, crap.
My therapist found mine and she asked me, he's like, hey, do you mind if I read this? I'm like, you mean the thing I put on the internet for the whole world to see that you can look at freely?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. And then the next week I came in and she just quotes this one line from it that she thought was really funny that actually I've gotten a lot of feedback on. It was so did Katie ever end up with Jordan? And because I made this stupid joke about there's this one female Marine who says she's not going to die because the new season, if she knows if Katie ends up with Jordan on the new season of Love in the Asteroid Belt. And I try to sprinkle dumb jokes like that in there. Some of them seem to work, but yeah. And in my book, I talk a lot about like, that first taste of combat and killing and all those things. And then as that week I was waiting for her to read it, I was like, oh God, this is going to be a really interesting counseling session. I mean, we've kind of talked about that stuff. I've been seeing her since 2019, but yeah, it was a little nerve wracking letting somebody who's poked around in your head that much poke around further in your head.
Yeah, that could be sometimes. In fact, I remember some of the stories that I've written into it. I've had editors like, I know this really happened to you, but nobody will believe this, so take it out of the book. When I put it on screen, I like authors though that use pop culture reference because it does add flavor to a universe, but they don't like suddenly in the year 47,000 BC, like they're still doing Shakespeare because that's all they know how to do on stage. Like I get why you do it because it's all in public domain, so no one's going to sue you if you quote lines from it. But on the flip side, like, come on, they've written more stuff since then in the 40,000 years into our future. I would hope.
Yeah.
So I like that. Although, so one of the series I just put out with a friend of mine, Dave Handley, the Ghost Ship series, in that universe, I designed it before Brexit happened. I predicted Brexit to the month, but not the day. Only because, it was like the writing was on the wall when I was building this universe timeline. But my theory on how we get to the stars isn't NASA. It isn't Elon Musk. It's they're building a lunar colony because they do the Real Housewives of the Moon. And that's reality TV is what gets us to the stars.
Oh my God. The really sad thing is I feel like that's totally plausible.
Right. I'm just thinking like, they say some of the best technology came from the adult entertainment industry because they were, looking, I mean, we'll just leave the robotics jokes alone from there, but In fact, there's a funny article floating around that says, great news, the AI pleasure robots will no longer kill you in your sleep. And I'm like, wait, that was an option?
Oh my God.
Are you familiar with Dust, the YouTube channel?
Yes.
They actually have one like that. It's like, I'm going to give some hella spoilers if you find it, but the whole thing is that they have, you find out that they have like AI humanoid replacements. And so one guy had replaced his wife because she was nagging him or whatever with this AI robot. And now she's competing against the wife's former friends and she's beating them in all the like marathons and stuff because, robot. And then the robot like goes haywire and cooks the kid and puts the turkey in the crib. And that's the end. Is he's like, this is some of the best food I've ever eaten. And then it ends with him standing over the crib and the chicken is in the crib with AI going wrong. And every time I think AI, I'm like, yeah, that could totally happen. Wires get crossed. If you haven't checked it out, dear listeners, just the word Dust, D-U-S-T, all caps, YouTube channel. It has everything plot-wise. Like, it's better than anything Hollywood's putting out these days.
Yeah, and most of them are pretty short, like bite-sized chunks, so you can watch a bunch of them in a day.
Yeah, most of them I don't think they're like 20 minutes. They're more, if the universe got expanded, it's mostly what I guess proof of concept more than anything. But they put out some amazing stuff, so I would highly recommend that. So when you were overseas, did you ever do the Folgers dip, or were you drinking just the tea then?
Just the tea.
I know you could get the tea from the locals. Then you had was it green bean coffee and tea, which I know they had some of that chai tea people loved, the mocha tea,
we
matcha.
We were never close enough to a major base to ever have green bean. Like we were out in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan.
So we did fob jumping, so we were all over. Some of the bases we went to were really, really tiny. A couple times we went on the Syrian border and we ended up on the wrong side of it because it's like dirt road to the left, dirt road to the right, and the LT didn't listen. And so, like, yeah, some of the fobs out there are just like they're in the middle of nowhere, so I get it. Although, like I said, I've got some friends that are helicopter pilots. There are places in Afghanistan where those helicopters, especially the 160th SOAR guys for the Air Force, where there's not enough air to give them lift. So they sort of angle up. When the lift dies, they kind of hope that on the downward glide, they'll make it over the mountain and then they'll catch the air again. Like, I can't imagine like fighting in a place where there's just not enough oxygen even for a helicopter.
Yeah.
Like, that just baffles my mind that we had fighting men there.
Yeah. I'm not upset that I never went into the mountains.
And me either. Like, at least, we had deserts. Like, the worst thing that we could happen, other than the few times we were in northern Iraq, is like if you roll your Humvee, you're in the ditch and you're going to drown in the Tigris or the Euphrates or whatever. But I mean, at least you got a chance of swimming away. Like, I can't replace oxygen when there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad that I did my 2 tours in Iraq instead of Afghanistan. So
yeah, I think the worst thing we had, like weather and terrain wise, other than just all the mud, was sandstorms. Like, we would have sandstorms that lasted for like a week, sometimes almost 2 weeks.
Those were the worst. So when you were doing your dismounted stuff, was that all light or were you doing supported?
It was all light. Like, most of our patrols, like if we went out at night, it was usually just 4 Marines. And if during the day it was 6 to 8 Marines, and then however many A and P we could talk into going with us.
Yeah. Okay. So when you obviously you got into writing as therapy, but before you got into writing it all down, were you also always a reader, or did that come later?
I was a big reader as a kid, and then my early time in the Marine Corps, and then after my brain got scrambled by 50 pounds of homemade explosive, I had a really hard time reading, actually. Words would move around on the page, and I would see colors that weren't there, and it was I would usually get a migraine if I tried to read for longer than a few minutes. So honestly, for a few years, I just really didn't read unless I had to. Until I did a bunch of neurological rehab with this really great physical therapist here in Lynchburg, and ever since then, like I can just read like I could as a kid. It's crazy.
I do it by either doing it audiobooks, which makes reading very expensive. I really ought to look into it and see if I can like check those out from the library or something. But yeah, I do a lot of audiobooks, or I'll read on the Kindle. But instead of the smaller Kindle, I have an actual tablet. Like, it's just almost like an iPad, but it's the Android version because it's cheaper.
Right.
And then you can still magnify the hell out of it, which kind of gets around some of the headache stuff. But I feel you, man. The head injuries, man. Your brain's not meant to be scrambled like that.
No.
The funny thing is you'll go through all those explosions and they're like, yep, totally not combat related. Like, because we just got blown up on our own for the fun of it.
The really fun was, so on my last deployment, we were going through the medical screening at the end of the MOB process. I don't know why it's at the end instead of the beginning, but whatever. And they do the hearing test, and my hearing tests were always really bad after all the explosions and everything, but it was always way worse on the left.
Tinnitus, the ringing in the ears.
Yeah. And this doctor tried to tell me that I had a brain tumor because I had this horrible asymmetrical hearing loss. I'm almost deaf in this left ear at certain frequencies, and then can hear them almost normal in the right ear. And I said, well, then just do some imaging, do an MRI or CT or something. He goes, oh, we can't do that. It's like, so you're telling me you think I have a brain tumor and can't deploy, but you're not going to do imaging of my head. And if you look at my hearing test scores, you see kind of the normal drop off you would expect in an infantryman after 4 or 5 years. And then like and then I get rocked by an IED, and then all of a sudden I can't hear out of that left ear, and the IED was on the left side, and then it stays stable after that. And I finally got in front of an army doc who had some common sense. Of like, oh look, you could hear it, then you got blown up, and now you can't. Seems like a pretty simple cause and effect to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that checks. I know for me, what they ended up doing is I could hear sometimes and not others, but they obviously know you. They can tell, like they're trained at weeding out people that are trying to fake it, right? Like the idea that you can get one over on the med board is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's the deny until you die is generally the rule. So if you get approved, like there's beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's there, right? Like there's no wishy-washy claims approved. And so they put me in the sound booth and they did the normal like testing, because when you do the testing, it's in a soundproof booth. And then I did, barely above needing hearing aids, but past, just bad enough to qualify, but not more than that. But then it goes from there to like almost horribly hard of hearing when you have any background noise. So they figured out it's the brain's ability to interpret the signals when there's conflicting noises. For me, was what it was. But they also told me the shrapnel in my leg wasn't combat related. So what are you gonna do? Only the Army. You'll get a kick out of this. So I was going through the VA at Hampton, because that's the closest one to where I live. And I was going through the neurology clinic. They ended up firing this neurologist. He was barred from working with the VA again. But he's basically, his defense of why it wasn't a TBI is because in order for him to say it was a TBI, he would have had to agree I was smart before I started because of where my scores were now. And smart people don't join the Army, was his defense. And so he's like, it's all in your head. I'm like, yeah, kind of, that's where the brain is, guy.
Yeah,
like,
technically not wrong.
Yeah. Technically right is the best kind of right, I guess. But yeah, so he ended up, I guess there were enough complaints about him that when I filed my complaint, because just the dude was a dick, like I guess that was like the bridge too far and they let him go. And I got a new neurologist who actually had a brain in that head of hers. So she was great. Did you get to do any of the bariatric, I think it's the bariatric pressure chamber that they do for the TBI stuff?
No. Yeah, and all my TBI stuff actually kind of got lumped in with the PTSD. Like the VA doesn't even actually recognize it as its own separate thing.
Well, technically they do. What it is they have to do the PTSD therapy for a year because of the overlapping symptoms. And so they have to rule out, like, in theory is after a year of therapy, certain things would get better, they would expect. And so the things that get better and don't get better tell them, okay, this is just still PTSD, or maybe the brain is cooked a little bit. And so that's why they require that, unless you have foreign object debris penetration, meaning like you actually had stuff that doesn't belong in your body penetrate your skull cavity. Like unless you have that, it takes a year of therapy for them to diagnose. And that's why they could have done more. The bariatric chamber is like athletes use it when they want to oxygen dope, I think they call it, but it actually has therapeutic benefits for head injuries. If you catch it soon enough, you can cause a little bit of healing. So I caught some of that in the beginning, but not soon enough to get completely better. But like when I first got hurt, they told me I wouldn't walk again because my balance was so jacked. But the bariatric chamber, like I swear that was a miracle worker. Yeah. I was talking to a buddy of mine. We're also convinced that at Walter Reed, they tell everyone they're never going to walk again because they know we're all stubborn. Like you don't join the military without some level of stubbornness. So it's kind of almost like, I'll show you, mother effer, right? Like, and so you do things just to spite them. And I wonder how much of that is like that reverse psychology, like Uno reverse card.
I mean, that's pretty brilliant if they do it.
I don't know. I think sometimes on the one hand, you think they're stupid, but on the other, like stupid like a fox, right? Like, I don't know. It's hard to judge sometimes.
Yeah.
So back to you, and we'll get a little bit away from the military stuff. So you said you liked reading and stuff before you deployed. What was your first memory of like engaging in speculative fiction? So that's like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, all the nonfiction. Yeah, everything that's like fiction, right? Like none of the nonfiction. A lot falls under spec fic. So what's your first memory of engaging in that?
Man, I read a lot of the Goosebump books when I was a kid. Like, you know, in the early 90s, like, you know, the Scholastic Book Fair would roll through and like you got to get the newest Goosebumps book. So that was a really big one. Funny enough, I ended up growing up not really into horror, but and then I remember as a kid too, I probably read Old Yeller like 1,000 times. And then my dad is a huge sci-fi nerd. That's probably kind of where I pick up a lot of it from. So like the Dune books, basically, as soon as I was, old enough for that to keep my attention, because there's no way I was reading that when I was 6. But before that, even Douglas Adams, like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I loved that as a kid.
Yeah, that is excellent taste. So were there any like fantasy side, like some of the cartoons that you watched as a kid, any of that? So technically Peter Pan, G.I. Joe would be qualified as speculative fiction. So did you engage in that kind of stuff as a kid too?
A little bit, yeah. I was more into superheroes as a kid.
Okay.
So, like Spider-Man, Batman. Never really liked Superman. I don't know why, but I really like Batman and Spider-Man.
What is it about Batman and Spider-Man that, because they're almost personality-wise opposites of each other?
Yeah. I know when I was a really little kid, I just thought it like Spider-Man's powers were really cool. And like, I think every little kid had like a crush on Mary Jane. But I know Batman was just like, he was just, even as a little kid, I was like, whoa, that dude's a badass.
He's going against actual supervillains and superheroes as a normal human.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And honestly, too, some of it was just like my dad really liked those, and it was just something I would do with my dad on like Saturday morning. So like it was cool because I could spend time with my dad, and he always worked really, really hard when I was a kid. Like sometimes he had 2 jobs, so like a lot of times like Monday through Friday I just wouldn't see him. So like Saturday morning cartoons was like the highlight of my early childhood.
And the 90s had some of the best cartoons.
Oh, they did.
Like these kids from the 2000s forward, like they don't know what they're missing. And now everything's DVR. So the idea of just sitting there in front of the TV with your cereal and your little pajamas, like watching for hours while you let your parents sleep in. And they timed it perfectly in the morning because they knew if they put it at the right time, the kids would watch it and let the parents sleep. So the parents would let the kids watch it so they could sleep. It was kind of like the perfect symbiosis right there.
Yeah.
So I don't think they appreciate that or the joy of like or maybe the terror of having to run to the bathroom and trying to get there and back if you had to go before the commercial was over.
Oh like my God. Or just like the absolute like abject terror of sleeping in too late on a Saturday. It's like, oh my God, it's the new Spider-Man episode.
Yeah. So you have siblings that you would watch it with, or were you no child?
I had a younger sister, but she was never really into those shows. Okay. When we were very young, she was very, very, very girly. So like Barbie, My Little Pony, and the funny thing is she like grew up to be like this big goth kid, and so now she listens to like death metal and reads the same books and stuff that I do.
Out freaking standing. Does she like near death metal though?
She's all over the place. Like it's she's still into a lot of industrial metal, even though that's not real big anymore. Are
you familiar with the near death metal? It's actually a band. So this kid was kicked out of his parents' house, and so they sent him to live with his grandmother, and he started a band, and she was like encouraging his creativity, and I guess home life was a little crazy, and so when he started doing heavy metal, she just came in. And so she started, rather than like kicking the band out, she started just joining them for the fun of it. And it kind of became the thing they bonded over. And because she was like in her 80s, when she would do the heavy metal vocals tracks, they called it near death metal instead of death metal because of her age. It was like a joke. And so like her and her grandson, they just rocked out. For a while, they had some hits out there. I don't know if they're still performing because this is like 10 years ago.
Right.
But yeah. I appreciate the puns. So, it's like a dad joke thing. You just, once you get kids, you like puns get like incorporated into your brain pan. So, all right. Well, we've talked enough about you. So we're going to play that beautiful bean footage, and then we're going to jump back and we're going to talk about your book. So, all right. Play it for us, sir.
They picked a fight with the wrong species. A nation at war. The United Stars of America. Born in the conflagration of an unprovoked alien attack, the newest entrant to galactic politics took the few crumbs of hypertech gifted to it and ran with them, soon expanding over dozens of star systems and establishing a wide trade network, protected by its powerful navy and the dreaded warp marines. In a fight to the death, a single marine platoon tasked with protecting an embassy on a hostile alien planet. An embassy and the fragile human enclave around it that soon finds itself surrounded by armed mobs. Can the Marines and a ragtag band of civilian and Navy personnel survive long enough to be rescued?
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So, all right. We appreciate your patronage there, CJ. And with that out of the way, so let's talk about the series. So first off, where did the genesis of the idea for the Terra Ascending come from?
So I wrote this really, really awful sci-fi version of my Afghanistan deployment. And at first I thought it was good, and then I let people read it. And then it's like, all right, so I was like, all right, I'm going to take a step back, and I'm gonna basically talk about my Marine Corps career before Afghanistan, but you know, throw in like sci-fi elements and like set it on Venus, and you know, bounce around between space and Earth and all these things. And I'm also a massive history nerd, and like most massive history nerds, I've been through a Roman history phase. So there's a whole lot of like Roman history stuff going on in the background, specifically like right before the fall of the Republic and the establishment of the empire. I don't know if you're familiar with the, you know, before Caesar, the civil wars that occurred between Marius and Sulla. That's kind of what's playing out as the political situation in the background. And creatively, I've named the two heads of those factions, Marius and Sulla. So that's kind of like what's going on. It's like my borderline autistic obsession with the Roman Empire, and then like my early days in the Marine Corps kind of meshing into this one hopefully coherent story.
I read Marcus Aurelius's Stoicisms at least once a year. So like, dude, you're speaking my language. And one thing we joke about this on this podcast a lot, but like some things that are universal, if you go back to, they found it carved into the latrine on one of the forts along Hadrian's Wall, from the obviously the time of Hadrian the Emperor, excuse me. And even back then, the soldiers, what were they doing for their decree? They were drawing penises.
Yep.
So some things never change. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't even shock me that you go back. I've seen some funny memes about like because Constantinople was also the part of the Roman Empire, right? Like the Byzantine Empire was the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire technically outlived the Dark Ages.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, didn't fall till 1453.
Yeah, I think that is so cool. I'm like I said, I'm the history nerd. So, yeah. So obviously, like when you were writing this, were you intending to draw on the Romans, or did that kind of just happen naturally as you were writing it?
It kind of happened naturally. So at first I started to kind of write the politics of kind of what was happening when I was in the Marine Corps, and it really just started to annoy me. I was like, well, realistically, a lot of what's going on now is mirroring that time in the late Roman Republic. So like, I'm just going to use that because one, it's actually a little bit better of a story. And two, I know how it ends because I've read all those books, and I'm hoping our story doesn't end that way. But so yeah, it kind of just flowed in naturally. And then I thought some of the words were cooler. So like, there's no presidents in this. There's like consuls and praetors and aediles and things like that.
Okay. So would you consider this pure mil sci-fi, or is it more space opera, space saga with military elements?
I would say it's almost a pure military sci-fi. There is a little bit of bouncing around, but it all stays in the Sol system, because in this book, humanity hasn't. Well, I don't want to spoil anything for later in the series, but essentially in this book, like it appears that humanity has never left the Sol system.
Okay. I mean, you know, you need a little mystery. I don't mind that.
Yeah.
So when you write, is this something that you like write by the seat of your pants? I mean, obviously, our audience are readers and consumers of content. So like, this is not a how to be an author podcast, but when you do write these stories, does your artistic style, is it more like stream of consciousness and you spew it out? Are you more detail oriented and outlining it?
So originally so a bit of both really with this one. So originally it was supposed to be 3 short stories that weren't necessarily going to be related. And it was just going to be like a story about me, a story about, and then 2 guys I served with. And then as I started to write it, there a couple characters like this Navy intel dude named Coleman ends up becoming just really fun to write. And then he starts showing up in all the stories. So I'm like, well, crap, now they're related. And then I add 2 more like parts to it. And that was okay. This is just one big story told from 4 different perspectives now. So that part kind of happened by accident, but each individual piece of it was actually like outlined in excruciating detail, but then I had to go back and change it to make it all fit together.
So do you see this being like one of those David Weber kind of arcs where you got like 57 books later and, you know, your main character is now got a wheelchair, but he's still commanding the troops because reasons, or is this going to be a shorter arc? Like, where do you see the story going? And that's not actually a dig at Weber. I'm just making jokes, but obviously Honor Harrington isn't in a wheelchair in the story. That was sarcasm, people.
Yeah. Don't come at JR. Come on.
You get the right JR, as in you, because, you know.
Yeah, come at me. Whatever. I was a Marine, right? I'm a bullet sponge. I can take the fire. But I have about like 10 books worth of stuff in my head with this arc. The main character, Corporal James Aurelius, I have some absolutely awful things planned for him in the future. And it's honestly going to take probably 6 or 7 books to really get around to to the really, really deep cut that I want to do. But like he's trying to find himself in this book, and then he slowly becomes more confident, and then I'm going to crush him. And then, yeah, it's going to be a whole big thing.
So when you pick this cover, obviously it's a little bit of modernist look at a cover, more realism and less cartoon graphic style of art. I'm not the art guy, so just bear with me. But was this intentional, or are you just kind of, you know, you're a new author, you got what you could afford, or like, tell me the story behind this cover.
So it was intentional. Like some of the things that I kind of drew on is like some of my major inspirations for this were, you know, Starship Troopers, Halo. I actually the kind of the vibe of the Alien franchise, Galaxy's Edge, and I don't know if you've ever read it, but the Strange Company series by Nick Cole.
I've read it.
Yeah, and so kind of that kind of stuff, which is just this kind of gritty, realistic military sci-fi. So I didn't really want anything cartoony.
Okay, that works. Is this something that you've already planned out future covers? Or because, you know, that's the hard thing is if when you're not a fast writer, like you're not writing a novel a day like Rick Partlow, sometimes, you know, it's hard to get the same artist to do all the covers. So you have like overarching themes. So is that something you've already planned out to the point where you're getting covers made, or are you just going to have to see as you go?
I'll mostly have to see as I go. I actually, and what I'd really like to do is I play around with Procreate on my iPad, and I'd one day like to get good enough that I could just do the art for my own covers, because I actually really enjoy drawing on it. I've taken a stab at the cover for book 2, and I'll probably show it to some people and see if I can get some honest feedback on it before I decide whether or not I want to go with it. But it's this very much same kind of vibe, but like I redesigned the armor a little bit, and the armor is going to be a little different for the main character in book 2 anyway. So it'll be okay that it's a little different. But yeah, honestly, I'd like to do my own cover art just because I actually really like to draw.
Okay. I know one of the things we're actually looking for the next Santa anthology that we talked about. One of the things that we've actually looked for is T-Rex Studios, which is pretty good. Might want to check those out too. His art style, I think, would work for what you're doing if you're looking for batch your covers together. Plus, like I said, his art is amazing. If you just are bored, if you're not even looking for a cover because you're not an author, like just go to his website. I'll throw that in the show notes and check out his art because he's got the like a lot of artists, will have their portfolio. His portfolio alone is worth just looking at. In fact, I'm going to throw that in the show notes so you can check it out, dear listener, because his art is amazing. There's another guy that does really cool art, although I don't speak the right language to talk to him. I want to say he's Croatian, maybe. He did some of John Henry, Jack Campbell's universe. I'm drawing a blank on the series. But he did one of the sci-fi universe, the Lost Fleet series. He did one of the translation covers. His name is the Blue Crown, and he does that's just his tag. But I think it's like Croatian or Ukrainian or something like that. Like it's not English, but his art's amazing too. That's kind of the fun thing is just to let art inspire you. Sometimes just look at the cool pictures. So, okay, so moving on past the art, for the series, like, what can you tell us about the main character?
So the main character, so there's actually a few different viewpoint characters in the book. The main one who you kind of start and end with is that guy, James Aurelius, and he's based on me. So, and a lot of it was kind of me writing through a lot of thoughts that I've had and struggled with since I've been out of the military. And a lot of it kind of revolves like, am I doing the right thing? Am I a good person? And he starts out in this kind of BS like security forces job because I was security forces briefly in the Marine Corps, and he feels like he's missing out on the war, and he's not a real Marine. And then he kind of gets thrust into it unexpectedly, and he honestly isn't ready for it. And so it's about him trying to cope with this thing that he thought he wanted that in reality he was not ready for.
I don't think anyone's ever truly ready for war. I mean, I have very vivid memories. Like we mentioned earlier, my platoon sergeant was a combat veteran with lots of deployments under his belt. And I remember we're standing there in the pre-deployment briefings that they give you, all the security briefings and stuff. And you'd hear these blowhards talking trash about how cool they were going to be. Like they were going to be the next John Wayne meets Rambo and John Wick all at once. And I remember he got up there and he told everyone, it's like all about all the blowhards. When the shit hits the fan, mostly of them, you'll see asses and elbows as they're running away. And so like that kind of stuck with me. It's kind of true. It's nobody's really ready, but the ones that think they are generally the ones that are least ready. So that tracks just in general with life experience, I think.
Yeah. And then, so the other viewpoint characters, like the other ones are all more kind of salty veterans. And those stories more explore like dealing with loss. And then kind of all of those viewpoints converge at the end, and you go back into Aurelius's viewpoint, and things kind of coalesce and it all starts to click, like, okay, this is why we were looking at this, and this is why we were looking at this. And
okay, now just from a purely creative standpoint, like one of the things I've struggled with sometimes is because of my own experiences, like getting the truly, raw recruit vibe on the character, because, at this point when you're writing, you've been there, you've done that, trying to capture the essence of the before without having them become super salty too quick. Was that something you had trouble capturing when you were writing your characters?
Honestly, no. And I think that's because, so I work for a fire department now, and I'm heavily involved in the recruit academy. So I have this constant supply of fresh recruits to watch and to watch them have those oh crap moments, as like when we first put them in a building that's on fire, or we hand them a hose and say, go put out that car fire. And you see in their eyes that their butthole is puckered, and they realize they were not ready for this.
I've done some of the Army firefighting school. It is, yeah. Give me a machine gun in a firefight any day. At least I can shoot the bad guys. It's kind of hard to shoot a fire. I mean, you can put it out with water, but that's assuming it's, the right kind of fire where it will get put out. Shut up. My phone thought it was Siri instead of Sirius. The AIs, man, they're going to get us. So, well, since I mentioned AI, so what kind of tech is this universe having? Are they having automation? Is it artificial intelligence there? Like, what are we talking as far as tech?
So, it's 400 years in the future, but World War III is come and gone, and then there was a 200-year dark age. So they've really kind of only in the last century, by the time this book happens, started to pull themselves out of that dark age and get back into space. So the tech is actually kind of more near future, but the spaceships have kind of advanced a little more quickly. But like the firearms are, I mean, they're still, chemical propellants, but where the guns get a little different is most of the weapons use a 2-stage ammunition. So like it fires a round, and then that round is almost like a little rocket, and you can dial it up or down from like subsonic to hypersonic just by flipping a switch on a device on the side of the handguard. There's some plasma weapons. At the point of Terra Ascending, there is no faster than light travel, though that's kind of like the big prize everyone is going for.
So one of the things that comes up in a lot of sci-fi is this idea, like spaceships, what do you call it? Satellite stations, like if you put something on the Lagrange points, that sort of thing. Obviously, if you get in a firefight on those, you don't want to poke a hole in the side of your ship, right? That's kind of bad for living. And so a lot of sci-fi will go with onboard stuff. They use more flechette rounds because it's just darts, essentially. Do you address that, like when you talk about combat on a ship versus obviously dirt side, it's a little more forgiving?
Yeah. So that is addressed. There is some combat on ships, and actually at one point, one of the characters yells at another, "Is like, who cares? There's already holes in the ship," as they're shooting. But the device I was talking about, I call it a projectile velocity modulator. So you can dial that way down, and then a lot of times on the ship they're using a frangible ammunition. So you dial down that velocity, use the frangible ammo. It's not going to punch through the walls.
Okay. So what about AIs? Is that something they have?
So there's two. I distinguish between two types of AIs in the universe, and there's dumb AIs, which is kind of like what we have now, and then smart or sentient AIs. And you really only see very limited dumb AIs in Terra Ascending. I have plans to draw in the sentient or smart AIs in later books.
Okay. So I want to go back a little bit. You said obviously there was a Dark Ages at some point. There is one theory that if we actually had another Dark Ages, we'd never progress to the technology we have now, because all of the resources that you would need, the crude oil and that kind of thing, that would be easily tapped before we could rebuild, is already tapped. Mm-hmm. So how do you address the need for fuel to get to the point where you can do the things?
So an event that I refer to throughout the book, the collapse, occurs kind of like early 22nd century, and kind of my premise is that humanity's kind of figured out alternative fuel sources, and then large sections of the population are just killed off. Like the world's population plummets as a result of all this, because there's a nuclear exchange, like there's massive climate change, diseases run rampant. So you lose billions of people. But there's basically little bastions where this knowledge is kind of preserved, almost like kind of like Foundation almost, or like what Harry Seldon sold is the fake reason for the Foundation, not the real reason. So they kind of address that. And then I have had a thought of almost having like this almost like diesel punk thing going on in the interregnum between the two. But because of what you said, that may or may not make sense, but it would be fun to play with.
Okay. What about robotics? Because that's something the military now is branching into.
Yeah, so there are a lot of servitor bots. Most of the bots you'll see in it are either they're one of two types. They're some sort of flying or hovering drone um, that do a variety of things like reconnaissance, direct combat. Some of them are just like straight up little suicide swarms. But most of the actual bots that are like either on wheels or on legs are more there to perform like menial tasks that humans don't want to do anymore. Except in the Marine Corps, privates still do those.
Okay. Yeah, but they'll never have to burn shit like we did in the early war, or like they did in Nam. So I know one of the things that I've seen, the X Project, XCOM, I think it's called, or whatever, like the military DARPA does, and they've got some robot dogs almost that are intended to like carry like equipment. Of course, the minute they do that, they're just going to give you more equipment to carry because, well, you're not carrying it. The robot is now. It's not like going to lighten the load. It's just going to mean you carry more.
Yeah. And then the dog breaks, then you carry it anyway.
Yeah, and the dog, because, that's sensitive. Yeah, it's and then the poor sergeant's got to sign for all that. Like just, as an E5 in 05, like the amount of dollar value. I just sweated bullets every time I left the armory because I signed for all the things. And so I'm just imagining now all this future tech. It's like, ooh, yeah. So obviously you've started this after the invasion of the Ukraine, Russia. We're not taking a political side, dear listener, but as part of that war, we did see the widespread use of drones as combat technology. Even before this one, I think it was, a couple years before the invasion, they had an issue where a drone swarm attacked a Russian fighter jet, got into the air thing on the jet. I'm not a plane person, so forgive the terminology. It got into the engine and it caused a crash, much like you worry about birds on a regular runway. So we know drones have certain kamikaze uses and they're cheap. How do you use them in this series? Is it something you thought out based on what you're seeing in the world, or did you kind of take a different path with them?
It is based on stuff I've seen in the world and stuff I've seen in fiction. Like I don't explore the big swarms that I have plans for too much in this book, but they're going to be much more prevalent in book 2. But they're going to actually behave more like bees or wasps and have kind of this hive mind where they can track and lock on the targets really well. Like they're kind of mentioned in this book, and they're called hunter killers. And one of the characters talks about how, like, one isn't a big deal. Like anyone can handle one. The problem is when one finds you, 1,000 more come. And
the YouTube channel Dust that we talked about has a series or a short, like 20-minute film about that called Slaughter Bots, and the danger of what happens is, it's great military technology, but who controls it matters as much as the capabilities, and it's really easy to kind of hijack that kind of stuff. So do you factor in like the need to harden for security purposes now, all this technology that you're adding?
Yeah, and I'm actually trying to handle like tech and hacking and things like that in kind of a humorous way. So you have like these essentially dumb grunts that are just like, I don't know how to computer, damn. And then there's like usually like one or two smart guys. Like in this book, it's always the Navy intel guy, or like this Persian spy who are the ones that know how to handle the tech. And then you have, especially at the end, you have the Marine James Aurelius, and then an Army guy named Keller, who are basically just guys pulling a trigger. So I try to like juxtapose those two things. Like you have this almost like primitive caveman with a gun, and then like these super smart people right next to them, and they're all working together.
So you're talking about the various archetypes, and there's always that one guy who's too smart for his own good. They call him the professor oftentimes. Like there's a reason that's a trope in the comic strips of the day. Get the guy that's obsessed with knives because he thinks it's going to get him laid, and it never does. The guy that's going to marry the stripper, and then of course the go to war, go to jail. So do you factor all of those kinds of people in?
Yes, but I don't really think about it from like a literary archetype kind of story or perspective. It's more just like, oh, these are the guys I served with, because I feel like those things play out in novels, but I feel like every infantry platoon also has every one of those guys.
Yeah, I mean there's a reason they're an archetype, right? Like
I
had the guys that were, and the professor was always essentially your barracks lawyer who never knew the UCMJ as well as he thought he did. Anyway, not that I'm salty about that Article 15. So is this post-America nation, or is this like American Empire? Or like what are the polities involved in this?
Yeah, that probably would have been a really good thing to mention in the beginning, huh? When you first asked what the world was like. But anyway, so this, like, the United States doesn't exist anymore. North America is mostly a barren wasteland. Because when World War III happened, essentially, like, the United States got bogged down in a civil war. The American forces in Europe essentially were left stranded, and they fought this defensive kind of war against the coalition of independent states. So, that big coalition Russia heads, that's basically just former Soviet countries. And then, there's this big nuclear exchange, but there's this essentially weapon that can shoot nukes out of the sky, and but the Europeans control it, and they shoot down the ones that are coming for Europe and just let all of them hit America. So the Americans feel very left out, and they kind of end up taking control of this post-American, like, European super government. And then that eventually becomes the United Free Republics of Terra, or they just call it the UR, United Republics for short, in the book. So that's kind of one of the major political entities, and that's where all the characters are fighting from. But the real big power in the Sol system is actually the Shenzhou Empire, which is basically China after they took over Australia and a bunch of other places, and they've already colonized a lot of space, and they're kind of the threat of Big Brother of the Shenzhou, like, cracking down on the UR and Persia and all these other lesser nations is kind of this thing that's just hanging in the background, and actually becomes a major plot point about halfway through the book.
So what about augmented armor? Like, obviously stuff that's going to be load bearing. So we're talking like power armored. I think the first power armored suits we're going to get is probably going to be tied to loading docks kind of equipment. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to actual military machines, but obviously you can repurpose things. So what are we looking at as far as like suited power armor kind of thing?
So your average grunt has like just a kind of a passive frame exoskeleton, which you're already kind of seeing the military play around with. And all it does is help you carry load. It doesn't enhance anything else. Just kind of takes the load off your back a bit.
Well, hold on. You and I both know that as soon as they do that, it takes 20 pounds off. Let's have them carry 20 pounds more. It's not going to make anything lighter for us.
No. And so that's the lot of your average grunt. And, they're still wearing open face helmets, and they got shoulder panels, thigh panels, all these things. So they have more armor, but it's not going to look too dissimilar from, what we would see, Marines and Army guys running around in today. Now, when you get to your SF dudes, that's where it's going to look almost more like Halo or Titanfall or whatever, and it's going to be this performance enhancing armor that makes you run faster, jump higher, all the cool little optics. So that powered armor exists, but it's not everyone has it.
So it's the cost of it initially is going to be prohibitive.
Yeah, and even then, like, there's in the book, like, there's problems with the armor, and they're not quite to the point of like mass producing it yet. And even on the other side, like the big bad guy in this book is the Caliphate, which is basically ISIS in space. And some of their guys have the powered armor. Some of them are more like what I just described with your standard grunt, and then some of them are just like guys and schmogs and man dresses running around with old AKs.
Because why not?
Yeah.
So do they have heads up displays for armor or aim assist, or are we talking just iron sights with maybe scopes of some sort?
Yeah, so they do have a heads up display that gives them all kinds of information, and I reference it throughout the book. It does help them aim, and because the armor is completely powered, they can actually use the armor to stabilize their shots on the run. So there are points at which they're in a dead sprint and still nailing people in the chest.
That only works for the super soldiers, not the average grunt.
Yeah, and the average grunts will point out, will say that, like, oh yeah, we can't do that, as they're watching the other guys do it.
Well, they can't either. The armor can. So
yeah.
So how do you build like obviously military units are known by the culture in them, right? Marines, for instance, as a whole, have a high esprit de corps, whereas the Army, that's unit by unit. Although the Marines would tell you everybody's a rifleman and one shot, one kill, and I'm alive because they missed. Because I've gotten in firefight with the Marines. So, like, obviously culture, but then the reality. How do you factor those facts of military life into the novel?
So first of all, I want to say that I actually take as a former Marine rifleman, I take great offense to the saying every Marine a rifleman, because every Marine is damn sure not a rifleman. But as far as factoring that in, I try and draw from, like, basically, like, you have like your super hoorah Marines in there. Like, there's this gunnery sergeant who's he's kind of getting old and frustrated, but he's still very, very motivated and, like, wants to be the tip of the spear, and he wants to be the first one in.
He's fighting old age, yeah, and he's angry about it.
Yeah, and he's in this very, very elite special forces unit, but now he's a he's a gunny, he's an E7, but he's just a team leader, and he just come from a different special forces unit, which is basically force recon, where he was a platoon sergeant, and he's kind of sitting there like, this is almost a demotion, even though he's in this tier 1 unit. So, like, there's a lot of dark humor. There's a lot of, because, and I kept the whole, like, there are no Marine medics in this, it's still Navy corpsmen. And so you have the Marines poking fun at the weird Navy dude, and the Navy dude throwing it back at them. And then there's some interactions with other branches where they talk crap to each other. So, I mean, it's just, as far as integrating it, I just, wrote, how we actually talk to each other.
Okay. So did you put the Space Force in there?
I haven't. Yeah, there's no mention of the Space Force or Air Force. It's just Army, Navy, Marine Corps.
As was intended. It used to be the Army's Air Corps, and then they became the Air Force. So we just took them back. I get it. He took away their driver's license and grounded them. So in this world, I'm assuming that if it's Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, then you've got shipboard forces would be the Marines, the Navy flies the ships, and the Army would be ground side only. Is that how you did it?
Yeah, and in this world, the Marine Corps is slowly becoming so the Marine Corps is literally just naval infantry in this. There are no admin Marines, there are no lawyer Marines. They're like, if your job is not to drop bodies, you are not a Marine, you're in the Navy. So the Navy is by far the largest of the 3 forces, because they handle all the ancillary jobs that have to support the Marine Corps and the fleet and all these things. And the Army, it's kind of hinted at but never directly said, is almost fighting this battle with irrelevance as humanity pushes out into the stars, because there's kind of like, well, why do we need this just ground-based force? We need a force that can go from space to the ground and back into space. But I have ideas on how I'm going to force them to adapt and remain relevant.
So do you have a role for like a reserve guard type function, as well as militias for, territorial armies, if it were on the various planets and such? Because obviously, like, the bigger things get, the more bureaucracy there is, and red tape slows everything down. So there's going to be a trend, I think, towards, the Martian colonies are going to want their own sort of local defense. You almost essentially have the American Revolution in space, but with Romans, right?
Yeah. So there's going to be a bunch of, they're not going to call them reserve forces. They're going to be auxiliary forces. And you're going to see the first time I'm really going to dive into that a whole lot is when essentially I'm going to do a book that's set in Virginia. But in this universe, Virginia is this barren wasteland full of essentially it's going to be almost post-apocalyptic in the vibe. And you're going to have the Chesapeake Auxiliary Forces, that are in control of like all of the United Republic's territory in North America, which is kind of centered around Maryland and Virginia.
Okay. So is this obviously like this world is large, because obviously if we're going to write into stories in it, you kind of have to. Does your world yet have aliens?
It doesn't, but one of the things that I want to play with is the idea that they're going to find out that life is extremely common in the universe. And that's just kind of all I'm going to say about that for now.
Okay. So first we'll talk about the aliens. Obviously you haven't written that, so you don't know where you're going to go yet. But so where this is just more broadly as a creative person, if you were going to design your own alien species, would you let Mother Nature sort of inspire it to use kind of human animal analogs? Are you going to create something out of whole cloth? Are you going to use monsters and legends and lore to make your aliens?
So kind of a little bit of all of the above. I have an idea for some of the aliens that they're going to find in this series, both kind of unintelligent, essentially just animals, and then, you know, more intelligent. And, you know, a lot of it I'm just going to pull from, you know, like essentially like what we have here on Earth. But then I've been going down these deep research rabbit holes where like I'm trying to figure, well, you know, if it's a different type of star, how would that affect things? Or, you know, if like the planet was smaller, if it was larger, if it was more dense, if it was less dense. And I'm probably overthinking it, to be honest with you. In terms of my series now, in the Fallen Empire thing that I'm doing for Canon Publishing, they kind of gave me free reign to create my own planet, my own alien race and everything. So I did actually create my own alien race in their sandbox, and they're basically just like these bipedal tigers. Yeah, the rule of cool. And then like these like alligator wolf things that are kind of just chewing people up. And the bipedal tigers are smart, and then the alligator wolf things are more like dogs.
Okay. So last question, because obviously like we don't want to spend forever with it. One of the things that's going to be affected by aliens and space travel and all that is the role of religion. A couple of years ago, the College of Cardinals even had a meeting talking about like, if we do find alien life, how do you determine if it's sentient and thus one of God's creatures, or space cows and we can eat them? And I, for one, want to know what an alien space steak cows taste like. Like I'm down. Give me the Angus from space, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that something you factor in, like the role of religiosity for the characters? Obviously, like this isn't a religious treatise, but religion exists in the human psyche. So is that something you play with, like what all of this means in the grander scheme of things, or do you kind of skirt around that?
I do plan on diving into that, because so in this universe, like you know, the big five religions, they still exist. They're probably not going to disappear in the next 400 years. And some of the characters I wrote are very, very Catholic, and then some of them there's one of the main not one of the main characters, but one of the side characters is Zoroastrian. And some of these older religions are kind of have made a comeback. There are people that worship like the Norse gods, the Roman gods, the Greek gods, the Zoroaster and all those. And kind of the way I'm thinking about it is like some of those polytheistic religions, like as they go out into space, as humanity goes out into space and meets all these other aliens, for them it's gonna be like, huh, yeah, that makes sense. But whereas the monotheists are gonna struggle with it a little more. And as far as like, you know, like the space steak versus this sentient, like I plan on playing with that a little bit, and I'm gonna have some fun and poking fun at Marines. Like they're gonna kill things and eat things that they shouldn't. They're gonna have sex with things that they shouldn't. I have this great scene in my head where a Marine goes to BAS, which is what the Marines call sick call, and gets his bore punched because he got an STD from an alien.
That tracks.
Yeah.
So the last thing, obviously, this is a combat story, so there are injuries. what available augmentations are they? Because, you know, if you start talking about cybernetic arm replacement, that kind of thing, you start getting into transhumanism and what it means to be human and all of that. Is that something you dive into, or is prosthetic limb replacement more on par of kind of what we already have, which is inert but replacement?
So it kind of varies from nation to nation in this. So like I talk about in this book how various like gene editing and cybernetic mods and things like that are very commonplace in like the Shenzhou Empire, which is, you know, the richest, most powerful political entity the human race has ever seen. And then like in the United Republic, it's a little more taboo, or something that only very, very, very rich people do. But in my mind, in this universe, it's bordering on cyberpunk and how I'm going to handle it. Like it's going to become kind of its own problem and addiction for some people. It's going to give them amazing abilities, but it's also going to have these massive drawbacks.
Okay. So it's something that's going to play in as a plot point.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything about the Terra Ascending? Let me throw that cover back on there one more time. Is there anything about this universe that you think we kind of really need to talk about that we haven't gotten to yet?
Honestly, like for me, writing in general, but like this universe too, just because of some of the things I want to do with it. Like this is really the book. I mean, it's about combat. It's about loss. It's about, you know, stepping up in combat and all those things, but really it's about mental health. When I do get introspective in this book, it's very focused on, you know, the character struggling with doing the right thing or liking themselves or things like that. Even though the vast majority of it is just like, you know, poop's hitting the fan, stuff's going sideways, like, you know, we're in a gunfight. But to me, that's the big thing. Like this is about mental health. And I hope that some people, like maybe some people that have been through the same kinds of things that you and I have, can read this and reflect on their own experiences and maybe start to look at them in a more healthy way. That's what I would really like for people to get out of this. And that's what I really hope to get out of this.
Okay. That's obviously a noble goal. So, dear listener, I'm going to throw the link in there if you want to check out T-Rex Art Studios, the Lost Fleet series that I mentioned by Jack Campbell. I think he's rebranding all of it with his actual name of John Henry, former Navy officer, great guy. We've interviewed him for the show. I'm going to link the Slaughterbots episode Dust YouTube channel put out. Amazing content. Speaking of linking to stuff, how can listeners and viewers find you? And we're going to throw that all in the show notes.
Yeah. So I've got my website, jrwise.com, which looks halfway professional as of about 30 minutes ago. I'm pretty active on Instagram with the handle The Wise Author. Facebook and Twitter a little less active with the same handles. Yeah, those are the big ways to find me. And then, of course, Amazon.
And because he's a debut author, this matters more than any other time in his career. But we'd like to remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, people. It really does make a difference. Is this an Amazon exclusive book, or are you wide?
This is Amazon exclusive.
So is it in? I'm assuming that means it's in Kindle Unlimited.
Yes. Okay,
so people can check it out. Is there an audiobook for this?
There is an audiobook on Audible.
Did you narrate it, or like what's the story with the narrator?
Oh God, no! It would be awful if I narrated it. The guy's name is Patrick Kelly Shannon. He's a little lesser known, but man, his voice is just like silky smooth, and he did a great job.
Okay, can't ask for better than that. So, is this a one narrator deal, or there's a trend right now? You're seeing a lot of dual narrators, so when the girl voices, they actually have a girl kind of read it in. Is that something you did, or is it just straight one narrator?
It's just one guy, and he actually most of the female dialogue is this one character who's Persian, and he actually does a halfway decent Persian accent.
Halfway decent is one hell of an endorsement. So You can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the bits, shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Save your shenanigans from Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitter, and email. Send all the hate mail her way. She's here for it. If you go to the Linktree, you can find our Spotify website. I'd give it to you, but it's a bunch of gobbledygook. Don't hate me, hate Spotify. But while you're on the Spotify website, you could help support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. Hopefully, we'll have answers about what we're going to be using for our recording platform and how we made that work. Because as we record this at the end of November, I have all of December to figure out who the replacement is, because that's when this contract quadruples in price. So every little penny helps. Speaking of supporting the show, you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until it snorts out of their eyeballs. And what more can you want? So if you do that, it is a American-made company that is not a drop shipping operation. They roast those beans here in the U.S., so you're helping push the American economy along. Shopping local, it's a great thing to do. Good for you, good for the environment. So it's a win-win, people. Use the code PODCASTGRUNTS, and you get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback, so everybody wins in that endeavor too. So we really appreciate it if you do that. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thanks for coming on, J.R. This was a lot of fun.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
All right, with that, we're going to hit the end button, people. Wait for it.